It shows a 9-year-old boy standing next to Michael Jackson backstage, both of them mid-laugh, neither one aware a camera was pointed at them. That boy is now a grown man carrying a $200 million film on his shoulders, playing the same person standing next to him in that photo. Every casting director in Hollywood will tell you the same thing about big biopics. The role always goes to whoever can act the best. That's the rule. That's how it's always worked. Except this time, the rule broke completely. Because the man who ended up playing Michael Jackson wasn't the best actor in the room. He wasn't even in the room. He had never stepped in front of a film camera in his life. And yet, when the film was finished, everyone who watched it, critics, choreographers, even Michael's own mother, agreed on one thing. Nobody else could have done this. So what actually decided this casting? Because it wasn't a script. It wasn't an agent. It wasn't even talent alone. Stay until the end, because the real answer will change how you understand this entire film. Subscribe before we start. Let's go. Part 2. A search that wasn't supposed to end this way. When producer Graham King first began building this film, the plan was simple, at least on paper. Run a proper global search. Test dozens of actors. Compare tapes. Narrow the list. Pick the strongest performer. That is how every major biopic role gets cast, through a process built entirely around performance skill. Coaches are hired. Auditions are staged. Screen tests are filmed and compared side by side, frame by frame, until the best version rises to the top. For a role this massive, that search stretched far and wide. Established actors, trained dancers, performers with years of stage experience and polished reels. Every one of them brought something real to the table. Technical skill, discipline, professional polish built over years of training. But something kept happening in those early tests that nobody quite knew how to name. The moves were accurate. The lip syncing was precise. The costumes fit perfectly. And yet, every single tape felt the same in one specific way. It felt like watching someone perform Michael Jackson rather than watching Michael Jackson exist. That distinction sounds small when you say it out loud. On screen, it is enormous. Part 3. The lunch that wasn't a casting meeting. Around the same time, Graham King had lunch with Jaafar Jackson. Not as an audition, not as a formal casting call, but simply because Jaafar was family. And family conversations happen when you're building a film like this. There was no script involved, no cameras, no pressure to perform, just two people talking. At some point in that conversation, King asked almost as an afterthought whether Jaafar had ever considered acting. The answer was no. Jaafar hadn't trained for it, hadn't studied it, hadn't even particularly wanted it. His interests as a young man had pointed in a completely different direction, towards sports rather than screens. But somewhere in that same lunch, something shifted. Not a decision, not an offer. Just a feeling King couldn't quite shake afterward. The sense that he'd been sitting across from something the worldwide search hadn't managed to find in a single professional audition tape. He couldn't explain it yet, but he asked Jaafar to send him something, anything, just to see. There was no formal instruction given, no script pages to read from, no specific scene to prepare. Just an open-ended request from a producer who wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for, only that he wanted to hear something more before making up his mind either way. Part 4. The thing no coach can teach. What came back wasn't polished, it wasn't produced, it was rough, informal, recorded without any real production value at all. But it did something none of the professional audition tapes had managed to do. It didn't sound like an impression. Professional impressions, even excellent ones, tend to carry a certain self-awareness, a performer consciously reaching for specific vocal tics, specific mannerisms, checking boxes on a list of things Michael Jackson does. You can often feel the seams if you listen closely enough. This had no seams. What Graham King heard wasn't someone trying to sound like Michael Jackson. It was someone who had spent an entire childhood absorbing that voice so completely, so unconsciously, that it had become part of his own. Every pause landed in the same place Michael's pauses used to land. Every soft laugh carried the same shape. That is the piece no acting coach in the world can install into a performer, no matter how many months of training you give them. You cannot manufacture 17 years of proximity. You either had it or you didn't. Jaafar had it, and he didn't even know it was valuable until that lunch. Part 5. Why talent alone couldn't have won this role. Here is where it becomes important to slow down, because this is the part people tend to misunderstand. Talent still mattered enormously. Being a blood relative doesn't automatically hand someone the ability to carry a film, memorize choreography, hit emotional beats on command, or perform under the intense pressure of an entire production watching every take. None of that comes free with a last name. What changed the outcome wasn't that talent didn't matter. It's that talent alone had already proven, across dozens of other auditions, that it wasn't enough on its own to close the gap between performing Michael Jackson and being recognizable as him. The professional actors in that search were, in almost every technical sense, more prepared than Jaafar was on day one, better trained, more disciplined, more experienced in front of a camera. And still, something essential kept slipping through their otherwise excellent performances, something none of their training had given them access to. Jaafar started from a much rougher place technically, but he was the only person in that search who had actually watched Michael Jackson be bored, be tired, be irritated at a family dinner, be quiet in a room with people he trusted enough not to perform for. Every other actor had studied a public figure. Jaafar had grown up next to a person. Think about what that actually means in practice. When a professional actor prepares for a role like this, their research usually starts and ends with what's publicly available. Interviews, concert footage, magazine profiles, documentaries built by people who never actually knew the subject personally. That's a rich well of material, but it's also a curated one. Public figures manage what the world sees of them, consciously or not. The version available to researchers is, by definition, filtered. Jaafar's research looked completely different. It included ordinary things nobody would ever think to film for a documentary. The specific way Michael reacted to bad news at a family gathering, the small habits he had when nobody expected anything from him, the version of a person that only exists in unguarded moments among people he trusted completely. That gap between public archive and private memory is exactly the gap every other actor in that search was quietly failing to close, no matter how much raw talent they brought into the audition room. Part 6. The 2 years that closed the gap. None of that closeness meant Jaafar was simply handed the role. If anything, it meant the opposite, because now there was something specific to protect. And Graham King wasn't going to gamble a $200 million production on a feeling from one lunch and one voice note. What followed was nearly 2 years of the kind of work that never makes it into trailers. Acting fundamentals, built from scratch. Vocal training aimed not at mimicry, but at genuine range and control. Dance training so demanding that choreographers who had performed alongside Michael Jackson himself weren't initially confident it could be done at all. This is the part of the story that gets skipped over when people talk about the perfect casting. It wasn't perfect. It was earned. Slowly, through repetition, most people would have quit long before finishing. Family Access gave Jaafar something no other actor could buy or study their way into. But it was the 2 years of relentless, unglamorous work that turned that access into an actual performance capable of carrying a film. Neither piece could have done this alone. Not the blood, not the training. Only both together, stacked on top of each other for 2 full years. There's a version of this story where Jaafar Jackson gets the role purely because of who his family is, does the bare minimum of preparation, and coasts on resemblance alone. That version would have been an easy story to tell, and it would have made for a forgettable film. It's also not what happened. By most accounts from people close to the production, there were entire stretches during those 2 years where Jaafar's progress plateaued, weeks where he wasn't visibly improving despite hours of daily work, the kind of plateau that convinces most people preparing for a demanding role that they've hit their ceiling. The difference here wasn't that Jaafar never hit that wall. It's that hitting it didn't change what happened the next morning. Rehearsal continued. The work didn't stop just because the results weren't showing up yet. That kind of persistence isn't glamorous, and it rarely gets mentioned in the highlight reels built around a finished film. But it is very often the actual difference between a performance that almost works and one that completely disappears into its subject. Part 7. The answer to the original question. So go back to where we started. What actually made Jaafar Jackson the only choice? It wasn't that he auditioned better than everyone else, because in the traditional sense, he didn't. He wasn't even in the traditional audition process at all. It wasn't that talent didn't matter, because 2 years of brutal training proves it mattered enormously. The real answer is that this role required 2 entirely different things to exist in the same person at the same time. Technical performance ability and an authentic, lived familiarity with a human being the rest of the world only ever saw as an icon. Every other actor in that worldwide search had access to one of those things. Some had extraordinary technical ability. None of them had the second thing, because it isn't something you can train for. It's something you either lived or you didn't. Jaafar Jackson was the only person on Earth sitting at the exact intersection of both. That is why, when the film was finally finished and shown to the people who knew Michael Jackson best, the reaction wasn't, "What a great performance." It was something quieter and far more unsettling in the best possible way. The sense that they weren't watching a performance being given at all. They were watching a memory step back into the room. That is a very different thing from a good performance. Good performances are common. Films are full of them every year. What is rare enough that it may never happen quite this way again, is a performance built not from research alone, but from an actual shared life, closed by 2 years of work that made it possible for the audience to feel that difference without ever being told about it directly. If this changed how you see the casting of this film, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Did you already know about the 2-year process before watching, or did this surprise you too?